What's that? Who there? Whoa.
Dylan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Kyle. Stoked to chat.
Yeah. Really excited to dive into Mindbloom and your background today. So, how I like to start these is before we dive into the different pieces of the company and kind of the origin story, can you just provide like a snapshot for the people who have never heard of Mindbloom? What do you do? What are the, how do you go to market today?
Yeah. So at Mindbloom, we have this big mission to transform lives today, to go on to transform the world by dramatically increasing access to clinician-prescribed psychedelic therapy. Today, we are one of the leading providers of ketamine therapy through our partner clinicians in the US. We have a completely telemedicine-based platform that has increased access to treatment by making it more approachable through a really friendly approachable consumer brand, making it more affordable by reducing the cost of treatment by over 70%, and just making it more available to people through telemedicine. A lot of people don't have access to a traditional psychedelic therapy or ketamine infusion clinic. And by using technology, we've just helped bring it to a lot of people who weren't able to get to it otherwise.
A lot of people have heard about psychedelics and they're not super sure what it means, what it doesn't mean. So I'm really excited to get into it with you as like an expert in the space. Before we do that, though, let's rewind the clock a bit to your background. So I was exploring it. You seem like a startup guy through and through, and you started a few different things. So just to kind of anchor us, if you can take us through, as fast or slow as you'd like, your background from school leading up until kind of starting Mindbloom.
Yeah. So I'll go a little bit further back even from school. So I grew up in like a working class family in Southern California. And a big part of why I started Mindbloom is that I grew up in a family just annihilated by mental illness. Most acutely, my mother is severely mentally ill. We ultimately lost her to schizophrenia and addiction. And so that's been a huge area of interest and a huge part of my life. Coming out of school, I went to the Wharton School of Business at Penn, which I'm not a huge proponent of undergraduate business school. I don't know if 18-year-olds who have zero context in business should be taking finance and accounting quite yet. But coming out of school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I actually moved to Los Angeles from Southern California, worked at a big three talent agency, worked for an Ari Gold type, if you've ever seen Entourage, getting just berated all day. And after about a year of that, I came to know like the definition of soul crushing work, had no idea what I wanted to do, and was really fortunate that I was speaking to a lot of friends, fraternity brothers, people I knew from college, and a friend of mine, his name's Healy Cipher. He's actually the COO at Atomic, probably the number one startup studio in the country today. He was chatting with me and was like, "Oh, you sound like a startup guy." And I was, what are startups? I didn't even know there was a career path or something that you could do. I was chatting with him about his prior career at Deloitte, actually, in consulting. I know it's some you have familiarity with. So I came out to New York, got a product manager gig at like an early stage startup, and was instantly hooked. Since then, I've built a few companies. All of them have been focused on increasing access in areas that are like personal to me. So my first company was called Voters Friend. We were focused on increasing access to local democracy. We built a voting and election platform that allowed you to enter your zip code and for the first time ever see your entire election ballot all the way down to like city council member, connect with a lot of local political candidates, get a lot of election tips and reminders and aids, and ultimately was acquired by a company called democracy.com, which for like 15 years building the big LinkedIn for politics. My next company, Mighty, was focused on increasing access to civic justice. So we were helping plaintiffs get a better deal from the justice system by building a platform around litigation finance. We raised over $120 million of credit and equity at that company while I was there. It's the category leader in its space today. And then, that leads us to Mindbloom, where really focusing on increasing access to breakthrough mental health care treatments, starting with these first clinician-prescribed psychedelic therapy treatments, ketamine therapy.
Was the reason to leave Mighty, was it because you saw this psychedelic medicine opportunity and just wanted to pursue it? Or, just talk us through that a little bit, because I think people sometimes when they listen, they're not always sure like why entrepreneurs transition or if they can, et cetera.
Yeah, there's a few reasons I left. So one big reason that I felt like it was time. So when we start a company, at least for me, I think like, oh, I'm going to see this all the way through, right? That's the goal, to take it from from coast to coast, like from the 1 yard line down to the end zone. After 5.5 years of building, a few things happened. One is that when we started Mighty, we started this big mission to help plaintiffs get a better deal from the justice system. Millions of people get injured every year, and they get absolutely hosed by traditional liability insurance companies like Geico, State Farm, and Allstate. We launched a P2P lending company and a consumer brand, and ultimately it didn't work. And we saved the business by hard pivoting to B2B. But over time, those became like challenging customer segments to work with. And the business is doing great. And it was like really incredibly like exhilarating and fun and challenging, like 8-dimensional chess work. But for me, my connection like with the mission and with like the end person we were trying to help wasn't as strong. And so I really wanted to transition and build something that I could feel a little bit more mission aligned with, that was like deeply personal to me. Something that was like in my ikigai of like what I love doing, what the world needs, what I'm really good at, and what could be a vocation. The second reason is just I wasn't the CEO and I was ready to be CEO. Mindbloom, this is my first time, although it's my third company, being the CEO. And I decided to start the company as a solo founder, where I could, in my opinion, or at this time, try something where as a solo founder, I could just make like really, really rapid decisions. It was just sort of time for me to try to strike out on my own.
So, one thing that I love talking to founders about is the way they analyze an opportunity space, and then what are the triggers or the light bulb moments from that analysis that say like, I got to be in this space. For you, obviously, you had a personal connection to needing alternative treatment for this, which makes sense. But from a business perspective, when you looked at psychedelics, it's kind of like the Wild West from my perspective, right? There's a lot of open space. So how did you analyze that? And kind of what were some of the things that got you really excited as you were taking the first initial steps for Mindbloom?
There's a few different directions we can go in here. I mean, one is I've been thinking for over 11 years now that from my personal experiences, that the truth was that these medicines were deeply powerful, right? And hopefully the truth would get out there, and this would be something that society came around to and was helping people access. Probably about 5 years after I had started using these medicines for myself, I started to learn that there was a therapeutic and clinical paradigm and tons of research. So in my viewpoint, like I discovered this thing I thought on my own and thought I had this secret, but it was already out there. So this was something I've been following really closely for a long time and was already like the change I most wanted to see in the world. From there, I started to see a lot of the cultural tailwinds blowing. So, Tim Ferriss having like the courage to put his reputation on the line to talk about and promote the research, following along with the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, MAPS, and the amazing progress that they were making on MDMA-assisted therapy clinical trials and bringing these to market. And then starting to see even like Michael Pollan and Joe Rogan and other both sort of academic and scientific and like cultural influencers, for lack of a better word, promoting this. The tipping point for me was that I left Mighty. I wanted to do something in mental health care. I have a lot of friends who built really big telemedicine companies that are increasing access to treatment. I wanted to do it in an area that was deeply personal to me. And I was getting lunch with my personalized medicine physician in Manhattan. I was telling him how I wanted to do mental health care, but the thing that I thought was most exciting, where the future was already here, it's just not evenly distributed, was psychedelic medicine, but maybe we were a year or two too early. He blew my mind when he told me that he was prescribing ketamine therapy in his practice, and it was this growing sort of cottage industry of ketamine therapy providers with more and more research every day behind it and more clinical and patient outcomes. So I became a patient myself and clear as day, I saw, wow, if we can increase access to this treatment and make it available to more people and build an incredible experience around it, we could really transform a lot of lives and really accelerate the healthcare system's adoption of these therapies.
Yeah. And so ketamine was the starting point because it's the only FDA legalized psychedelic today, right? I mean, there's been some legislation passed very recently that with mushrooms, but is that why you started with ketamine?
Yeah, I mean, ketamine is the only prescribable psychedelic therapy. So options in psychedelics right now are to do like clinical, to essentially to be like a biotech or pharma company bringing a medicine to market through clinical trials. Clinical trials usually take 13 years and $2.5 billion. So that's not the sort of tech entrepreneur I am, but I applaud and cheering like crazy the people who are bringing these medicines to market. Other options are maybe to create an ancillary product like a education or content site. So a platform I really like for anyone interested in psychedelics is Third Wave, the thirdwave.co. They have a lot of podcasts and content around psychedelics. And then the third option is actually like care delivery. And so as a both consumer and B2B software entrepreneur, that was the area that I thought I could apply my potential talents, which is building a consumer platform around this.
One of the challenges I'm sure you're facing is that among a million is the education, right? Getting everyday people who haven't gone down this rabbit hole to be familiar with what psychedelics are, what they do, et cetera. And so I think maybe a good place to start, given that you were a patient and have experienced the treatment, kind of talk about from the patient side and then potentially from the business owner side, what is that experience like when you do the ketamine therapy?
Yeah. Why don't I answer two of your questions? So one about the education and then two, the experience. So on the education piece, I think one thing that's interesting is we actually don't have to touch the education. And the reason is I think a lot about like the adoption curve. So if you're familiar with the adoption curve, you essentially in any market or any product have you have like innovators, like tiny percentage of the market that is like just loves new stuff, even if it doesn't work. Then you have early adopters, then you have early majority, late majority, and then laggards. And right now, the market is so early that there are enough people out there right now who are hearing about psychedelic therapy in surround sound from Oprah and Dr. Phil and NPR and Joe Rogan and Goop and CNN, 60 Minutes. But there is all this latent demand being built with no ability to fulfill that demand. As a result, we have a lot of educational content on our site. We have Psychedelic Therapy 101 series, the neuroscience of ketamine therapy. We have videos. We do, exploration calls that people want to learn more. For the most part, most of the clients who are coming to Mindbloom have already learned a lot about psychedelic therapy and probably ketamine therapy, and are getting access in a way that is, affordable for them and available to them and that they're comfortable with. So I think the education piece is actually a lot further along today than like the actual ability to fulfill market demand for people and to actually provide like good treatment options for people. On the experience side, the way the Mindbloom experience works today is sort of three pillars. So the first pillar is we have a telemedicine platform, similar to like HIMSS, but for psychedelic therapy. We have a network of partner psychiatric clinicians who do like 30-hour-long remote video consults to prescribe people ketamine therapy for indications of anxiety or depression today. And we're expanding into other indications down the road. Those clinicians will also oversee people's treatment throughout a essentially 4-session program over 1 to 3 months. And then during that program, the other two pillars are we have a sort of headspace or calm meets psychedelic therapy platform that delivers therapeutic content and programs for people. So we have several different programs, such as like the basics of psychedelic therapy with Dr. Palios, our science director, learning to love yourself with Shannon Starr, one of our clinicians, overcoming anxiety, Kristen Arden, another one of our psychiatric clinicians on our platform. And then the third piece is we also give people specialized coaches that are essentially psychedelic guides. So these are like transformational addiction life coaches who are trained and also really understand sort of the psychedelic therapy modality and are doing guided video sessions and then message-based therapy and group sessions, throughout the entire program.
Okay. And so in a post-COVID world, are you going to have in-person clinics? Like, because I saw on your site and I was, reading, going in a wormhole, trying to educate myself before the podcast. And I think it seems like for this type of therapy, it's profoundly more effective when you have obviously a therapist or a clinician paired with the medicine. And so I'm sure you guys are figuring out a way to scale that from a telemedicine perspective, but also having in-person clinics could be interesting.
Yeah. The way that we think about, like I said earlier, is increasing access, creating outsized clinical outcomes, and creating transformational client experiences. When it comes to access, one of the biggest breakthroughs, maybe the biggest breakthrough in patient access in all of medicine has been telemedicine. Telemedicine reduces the cost. Telemedicine gets it to people who can't get to a space. And telemedicine, when done really well, it can be challenging, can actually create a much better experience because you don't go and wait in a waiting room for 60 minutes and fill out a bunch of paperwork and doctor sees you for 5 minutes and you're on your way. So for that reason, Mindbloom is laser focused on leveraging technology, content, and human care to increase access and drive these experiences. A big reason I think access is important is like personally, like I grew up, like working class, and the idea of paying like $1,000 for my mother for like ketamine therapy is impossible. And if you're like a single mother of 4 hours outside of like Wichita, Kansas, like how are you going to get someone to drive you, sit with you for 3 hours, drive you back, watch your kids, 10 times this year? Like that is not tenable. So I think there are huge reasons for people to come and do it in person. And I'm really excited about that approach. And I personally like going and working with somebody in person. But we're really focused on increasing access through the use of telemedicine. And in the future, we could build up spaces, especially as these other medicines become unlocked. They may require in-person licensed facilities. But right now, we're doubling down on the technology.
Yeah, I love it. One thing you mentioned before I'd love to double click on is you talked about you have a personalized medicine doctor. And I think, that was one of the first times I've heard that phrase. And so do you want to talk about like what does that doctor do for you compared to, the general care, primary care doctor that most people have?
Yeah, I'm a huge nerd. I'm really into the biohacking thing. What I do with my doctor is what I would call the difference between like old medicine and new medicine. Old medicine is reactive, disease oriented, hacking at the branches of fixing your symptoms versus like the roots of like actually being healthy. And new medicine is proactive, it's personalized, it's biometric, and it's not just fixing you when you're sick. It's about like how to live like a fully, not even optimized, but like having vitality, like being healthy, like being your best self. So what I do with my doctor is we do blood tests. We drill down into my different biomarkers to understand, where we might get a lift, whether that's like doing an food intolerance panel, supplementing with specific vitamins based on my blood panel. I do a lot of experimentation in sleep and diet. I played football for like 12 years, so I'm like pretty set with my exercise routine. I don't touch it. But that's a big part of like what we're drilling into together. I also think that a lot of personalized medicine physicians are at like Peter Attia, for instance, or like at the forefront of today's research. Oftentimes when I go to speak to doctors, I feel like they are still kind of living in medicine from like 20, 30 years ago and not medicine today.
Yeah. I love this stuff too. I'm curious, if you're willing to share, like, what are some of the 80-20 things that you found out from these tests that, I know it's personalized and so maybe it only applies to you or someone with a similar health profile, but what are some things that you found out that were shocking to you going into the process?
So one thing I learned from genetic testing, that has changed, I think, a large part of how I live my life is I have a, not incredibly rare, but fairly rare genetic mutation called the warrior gene. And so people with
sounds pretty dope.
So it can be dope. So the people with the warrior gene produce less MAO, monoamine oxidase, than usual. Monoamine oxidase goes in and it cleans up your like dopamine and serotonin. So if you have less than normal, that means you have higher than average dopamine and serotonin. And so like in studies, they show that like if people have like trauma as a kid, people who have the warrior gene are like significantly more likely to like commit violent crimes because they're all hopped up on dopamine and serotonin all day. When I learned this, and it's very challenging because it's hard to take like any individual variable, but looking at that, my whole life kind of came into focus because my whole life it's been like somebody like hooked up jumper cables to my nervous system from the moment that I open my eyes in the morning to the moment I relent to sleep every night. And so learning about that led me down a path of really investigating. I'll call it like investigating calm and investigating my parasympathetic nervous system, like the rest and digest nervous system. And like things I learned is that like I shouldn't ever have coffee, that I don't need coffee, that it decreases my emotional valence. I jump down people's throats. I'm bouncing off the wall and I'm frenetic. And I started to realize like I'm addicted to caffeine. I'm addicted to seeking like exogenous supplements like caffeine to get me going because I like that heightened state. And so that's like led me down a path of like optimizing my sleep, and early on led me down a path of meditation, which that was like 7 years ago, which cracked the door to something much deeper than just sort of optimizing my focus and emotional valence. That's one example.
One of the benefits of the quantified self movement that I'm also super interested in, with the levels and the 8 sleeps and the Aura rings, all these new companies, is I think one of the things they're doing is making it a little bit more accessible for more people to be able to have access to their own personalized data. Do you use some of those products, and what are your thoughts around those?
Yeah. So first, on accessibility of like blood testing, there's a really incredible company. I'm friends with both the CEO and her husband, called Parsley Health. They started in New York. I think they also have some beautiful spaces in LA, but they've also shifted to telemedicine, where at a pretty affordable rate, you can go in and get your blood testing, and they do like functional medicine, where they really similarly drill down into like, how do we understand your biometrics and optimize your health with both doctors and health coaches. So that might be an interesting one to check out for people who are interested in that. To answer your question about tracking, so I've gone through a lot of the tracking, and I've actually like peeled back a little bit. The reason I peeled back is that I've found that even with the sleep tracking, and I actually have an 8 sleep pod on the way that I just ordered, so maybe I'm speaking too soon, but I've used like a Dream electroencephalograph on my head while also cross-checking it with like an Aura sleep ring. I have like built a lot of trackers for myself, where I'll track how much time I spend in deep work during the day, what time I wake up, what time I go to bed, my calories. And even just like with the sleep tracking, I found that I would like develop orthosomnia. So insomnia driven by the tracking of your sleep. So more recently, what I've been working on is trying to like live a little calmer, meditative pace, and injecting like a little bit more of like the spontaneity in my life, and not like tracking everything that I do. So now I use tracking more of as like a calibration. So like I recently got the Whoop fitness band that tracks like heart rate variability, tested out for a while and looked at like what my heart rate variability is. And when I saw like, it's pretty good, it's healthy. Thought that maybe I didn't need to like continue tracking all the time, but that's just sort of where I'm at in my journey with it.
That's a really interesting point. Cause one thing I was thinking with it is, it's asymptotic, right? Like you optimize, you'll never get to 100%. So you're always chasing. And like at some point there's diminishing returns. And so I also wear the Whoop, and I feel like I was checking it pretty regularly early on. And then the numbers are all pretty consistent. So I'm like, yeah, why am I continuing to obsess over it?
Well, it's almost like the people who want to use it are the people who shouldn't. Like if you're like a striver or a struggler, like your battle is probably the fact that you're an optimizer when you should be a satisficer, right? And maybe people who are satisficers should maybe like optimize a little bit more. So that's something I've been trying to be mindful of, is being more of a satisficer, not an optimizer. Especially, as someone who works in mental health care. I find that is a critical practice for me in my mental health.
Yeah, well, so I'd actually love to go down that road on the mindfulness side, because it sounds like you've acknowledged in your own body that it's easy for you to get into a heightened state. And so you mentioned a couple of times having a dedicated mindfulness practice to level that out is pretty important. So like, what are some of the things that you do? I usually like wait till the end and cover all these wellness things, but let's just get into it, because I think you have a lot of knowledge and passion for it.
Yeah. I mean, I would say meditation and really cultivating awareness is probably like the most important thing in my life to me right now. I have like three big goals for my 30s. One is to like achieve as much like awareness and equanimity as possible, like 99.99 percentile. The second is to build this sort of iconoclastic, congruent company that is trying to propel humanity forward. Hopefully Mindbloom. It's going well so far. And the third is like build a tribe of people that I'm like commune close with. So I recently moved to Austin, Texas with my partner in crime, who's also our head of engineering at Mindbloom. And we're have these big ambitions to build sort of like the anti-commune commune with a bunch of friends and families here. In terms of my mindfulness practice, I started like 7 years ago. I started on Headspace, trying to be a better entrepreneur and get focused, and be a better leader, and build more space between stimulus and reaction. And from there, it's become deeply spiritual. I think is like a low resolution word. It means a lot to different people, but it's become like deeply meaningful to me. I spent the holidays 2 years ago on silent meditation retreat. Would have done the same. No, I spent the holidays last year on silent meditation retreat. I've probably read like 30 meditation and philosophy, spirituality books over the past couple of years. And the practice that I'm really trying to do is not just like spend time on the cushion, which is critical, but like bring awareness and meditation to like every single moment of my life. So I have like a sticky note here on my computer that says "wake up," right? It's like, am I conscious right now, or am I just a robot sleepwalking through everything that I'm doing? So we could jam on this for a while, but to me, it's like the greatest game and greatest pursuit is spending as much time in life conscious and aware of like what I'm doing, versus sleepwalking through.
And so other than the Post-it note and trying to like center yourself, like when you say be more aware, obviously you're trying to go for like in each moment you're locked in, but like tactically, like what are some things that because it seems like you're at a pretty ascended state right now, but like there was a to Z, let's say you're at V. A to V is from Headspace to where you are today is significant. So for people who are acknowledging to themselves that they do need something like that, but don't know how to get there, what would you say? Like what did you try?
Yeah. So for mindfulness, I think there are two things I recommend people. One is Sam Harris's Waking Up app is astounding. I think one of the biggest breakthroughs I had a couple of breakthroughs in meditation. The first was I had a bunch of false starts on Headspace. And then finally I committed, like, I'm going to do 45 days in a row. And if after 45 days I don't get it, I'm never going to do it again. Fine. But I tried it. And I was like 25 days in, and I was speaking at a conference in front of like a few hundred attorneys at my last company. And I have like very low emotionality, so I almost never get nervous. But I started getting that positive feedback loop of like stage fright. Like my heart started pounding, and I started like sweating a little bit. And so I closed my eyes for the first time ever, and I just like observed all those sensations arising, passing. And then I calmed down. I went up and I, absolutely crushed it. And I was like, oh, this meditation thing is legit. A second breakthrough I had was listening to Sam Harris's guided meditations before he launched the Waking Up app. And that was my first introduction to Vipassana, which is like the most commonly practiced style of meditation in the world, from Theravada Buddhism, mostly. And in Vipassana, you're oftentimes using the breath as a focal object of meditation, but it doesn't have to be. But you're just trying to get better at more accurately and more quickly identifying all sensations and phenomena arising and passing in consciousness as fast as possible. When I discovered Vipassana, it like unlocked almost like this entire like game where not just like meditating for the sake of it, like like it's some like homework or some like practice that I have to do, but it's this thing where you could feel yourself like getting better and better and better, and it like translating into real life, such that you're spending more and more time like catching yourself and like what you're doing and seeing like, oh, am I actually in control? Am I actually there for it? Or am I just like a robot just reacting to things on my normal like social programming? So I think Waking Up is like the best introduction that I would recommend to people, that I do recommend to people. And then the next is to read something that also explains the Buddhism behind it. Because I think when you strip out meditation from the Buddhism, there's a lot lost in translation. And so my favorite book by far in meditation is Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha by Dan Ingram, especially the original version. for me, that was absolutely breakthrough. And it's a large book, but it's a book I've read several times. And it's like the only thing I take with me on retreat.
Yeah. Wow. I need to check that out. I'm kind of in that. I had a lot of starts and stops. Not that I wasn't good at it. I just felt like it wasn't a priority. And then the last like 30 to 40 days, I've done it really consistently. And I have noticed towards the end, like towards, recently being able to, if I'm getting frustrated, like correct myself back, right? Like while I'm in the meditation, like the 10-15 minutes, I find that I'm not really great at, just observing the thoughts and letting them go. And maybe there's no such thing as doing it incorrectly, but maybe I'm not focusing the right way. But I actually love that time to like think about ideas. But I do find that when I'm getting frustrated and angry, I'm able to center myself. And I think that's an early sign that it is working.
Yeah. I wonder. So one thing I discovered is from reading Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha is that there's this concept in Buddhism. It can be translated in different ways, but essentially it's called like the five faculties. So it's the idea that you want to keep energy and concentration in balance and keep increasing them. You want to increase your like wisdom and your faith in something and keep them in balance and increase them. And then over the top of all five of those are like mindfulness or being aware of those things. When I learned about that, it really hit close to home because I realized that I spent all of my time working on wisdom, like tactics, how to do something, the knowledge, like the expertise, but very little time like cultivating like a deep, authentic faith and desire and like doing that thing. And so like what you just said to me made me think like spending a lot of time trying to learn the tactics of how to meditate, create systems for meditating, and like you're doing it to try to get some like benefit, but how much time is spent like cultivating like a deep desire for like why you're meditating in the first place. Yeah. So that's something I've also brought to like a lot of my practices is realizing when I'm just continuing to accrue more and more data and tactics and tools to accomplish something, but like, am I spending any time cultivating like a deep like desire? And if I can't, then like maybe I shouldn't be doing that thing. Maybe I should just focus my attention on something that I do have this like deep organic desire to do.
I heard this somewhere like the last couple of weeks. Everything you do should be deeply rooted in like a pure authenticity, and it's hard for everyone to cut through their own bullshit to get to like what they're authentically interested in. But once you identify those things, to your point, it becomes a lot easier to then focus on the tactics because you know that deep rooted desire is there.
Totally. I think you can cultivate the desire too, right? Like there are ways you can go out and like you can like read things or I think the other things you can do to like get fired up about something.
One other question I had on this, and then we can shift back to the business. I feel like we could jam on that for a long time. Is the commune approach? So it's relatively. I mean, the idea of a commune has existed for a long time, but it's relatively new in these days. And I think in the circle I'm in, it doesn't come up a ton. But Janine always talks about it, and so I'd love to get your perspective on how you guys are thinking about it, why you think it's better. A better way of living and kind of the steps you guys are taking.
Yeah. We got to figure out a better word for it because commune, there are these words that like are
it's negatively charged.
Yeah. There's a lot of words that are low resolution, right? Like language is lossy. Like there's a concept. I have it in my head. It's shifting moment to moment in my head. I communicate it to you. It means something different to you. And by that time, like our game of telepathy here is like totally broken. And commune's got to be one of the worst words. So the idea is that if I had like one fundamental philosophy, it's that humans really haven't evolved much in the last like 100 to 200,000 years. We have these ancient brains and ancient bodies, ancient relatively, living in this modern world. Ostensibly, we live in the most wealthy, free society that's ever existed, but mental health care, at least without COVID, is the number one public healthcare crisis. Like it is this massive problem. And I think it's largely because we're divorced from meaning, purpose, connection, and are bombarded by these like super normal stimuli that we can't handle, whether that's social media, porn, video games, television, our computers, work, like things that could be a source of joy in small doses, but because they're blown out of proportion, our brains can't really handle it. I think we are not fundamentally built to live in a small box with a nuclear family, especially in this day and age where people move all across the country and they are separated from their extended family, which a lot of our, more recent ancestors at least had around them. So the intent is to, recreate like the tribe or the clan of people who are like commune close, like friends and families, where we are living separately but together in like a community, but have set up a system where we have a lot of shared sort of social systems and supports. So things just like simple, like communal meals, raising your kids together in a large group. I'm not a huge fan of school as an institution. So private schooling, shared like recreational space, you probably cap it at like the Dunbar number, which is like the number of people you can like hold in your head as having a relationship with, which is about like 100 to 150, which is like 20 to 30 families, and it's a pretty big community.
That's awesome. And so are you guys looking at getting a plot of land in Austin ish, like maybe 10, 20 miles out, and just starting to build the infrastructure?
Yeah, I think one of my hypotheses, we have a few different ideas on the table, is to start with like a founding group of like 4 to 5, people, families, and to either buy a plot that has enough homes on it for that group, or to build on land. I think maybe buying a plot or living really close to each other to start is enough of like an MVP, and then from there, I mean, I know so many people who are like 1 foot in, and so I think you need to sort of create like the movie trailer, right? Like we need to like sell the vision by actually doing it. And so I think that'd be a way to like bootstrap getting it off the ground, and then from there, get enough commitments to go out and actually like build something on a plot on land.
And what are some of the people who are 1 foot in, 1 foot out? Like, what are some of the concerns? Obviously, you could leave at any time, travel wherever you want, go see your family. But like, because we live in a modern world now, where in ancient times, some of those luxuries you didn't have because of technology, transportation. But what are some of the points against it for some of the people? I'm just curious.
Okay, so I would say there's like 3 concerns. The first concern is moving to wherever it is. So the first is a lot of people still, even if they're knowledge workers, even if they work online, still feel like the shackles of needing to be near some like urban center, or needing to be, within a 6-hour drive of their family of origin. And so I think a lot of people, for them picking up and moving feels like a lot higher, like a lot more of an irreversible decision than it actually is. I think a second component is just like the activation energy needed to do it, which is why I think somebody else needs to sort of spearhead setting it up and selling the vision. And then the third is I think there's just like the inherent like knee-jerk reaction of like, it's not even optics, it's just the sort of preconceived feeling of like doing something that's against the status quo. I've seen that come. What's interesting is that I see that come oftentimes a little bit more from some women who think about it as it like relates to like how they're going to raise their kids. And then as they start to think about like what it would actually be like to, and myself included, like raise your kids around other people like you're really close with, that becomes actually like a really strong selling point to people. Like, oh, you mean like people who like really absolutely love my children are, with us all the time. And we have these like, really close family friends, and we're like raising our kids together. That feels like how you're supposed to do it. That feels true. And then I think similar to like psychedelics, I think people are just starting to hear about it, like in surround sound, like from other friends. And I think what we're just seeing is that like smart, independent thinkers converge on the truth, which is that we're not meant to like build families in isolation. You're meant to like do it in a community, especially when like loneliness itself is an epidemic, especially as people grow older.
You have kind of a growth background, quote unquote, right? Like at Mighty, you ran growth, and I know you have a growth mindset. So I'd love to get your perspective on, just how do you think about a growth playbook? Most of the founders I bring on, I ask them specifically for their business, right? How are you acquiring customers? How you think about acquisition, retention? What are some of the channels you're using? Like to try to get really tactical. For you, you can apply that to Mindbloom or any of the companies that you've worked at before, but I'd love to just get your take on it.
So I did growth for a while before I before I learned how to do growth. For me, discovering Brian Balfour who is currently runs this organization called Reforge, which teaches people how to do growth. Discovering his methodology was like the clouds parted, right? Like everything fell into place. So this is like using the scientific method in order to drive growth. So it's like systematically collecting quantitative data from what people are actually doing with your product, with your channels, qualitative data about what people are saying through customer interviews, surveys, and then like your intuition from your experience from market research. I do a lot of studying analogs. That's the business school nerd in me, like studying other companies and seeing different components of what's working for them that might be relevant to our use case. Taking all that data, feeding it into our hypothesis engine, spitting out hypotheses that are order ranked in terms of like impact, confidence, effort for both product and growth, in order to feed our business objectives and our overarching strategy, and then running an experiment cycle around those. I think for some people that can feel like a robotic, systematic way of doing it. But when you really dig into that process, it feels like an art and a science. And it's something that for me is like, I don't understand how people run growth processes without doing like literally this process that he's built and continues to build. And he's actually an investor in Mindbloom, but I was following his process from long before then. So you can like his incredible video I send out pretty much weekly to people who ask me about growth. You Google Brian Balfour heavy bits or just read his blog or Brian Balfour building a growth machine. It's just, he like lays the whole thing out for people. And he has this entire like video series. It's incredible.
I'm assuming you're a big manifester. It's one of the things that falls within the mindfulness and just being kind of present and aware. And I would love to hear, like, when you close your eyes and think like, I want Mindbloom to be this in 5 to 10 years, what is kind of your manifested vision? You alluded to it a little bit, but I'd love to hear it from you.
So we have this mission to transform lives today, to transform the world tomorrow. And so from a company perspective, I have this vision that we have not just helped millions of people around the world, heal and become like their most fulfilled self, but that those people have gone on to literally create a better world. Part of my psychedelic origin story is I used to be like a pessimist. Right. Used to be a really negative person. I didn't know I was. Like I had my friends, I had girlfriends, but I did not like people, and I did not like the world, and I did not like humanity. And I was trying. It was MDMA. It was the first psychedelic I ever had the privilege of accessing, and it like fundamentally catalyzed a transformation into being an optimist. And I have now gone on to do, I think, work for the world, or at least try to do work that I think can like create a better world versus maybe just like trying to get mine. I think when we paint humanity forward, we're on some sort of self-terminating path if somebody doesn't change. And we have like 3 options, and that's to like become a multi-planetary species, which Elon Musk is working on, upload our brains into computers, which Elon Musk is also working on, as is like Brian Johnson, a lot of other people, I'm sure. And then the third is just to actually evolve the humanity and like the wisdom and the consciousness and the compassion to like match like the destructive technology and capabilities that we have, so we don't like blow ourselves up. And so my long-term vision is both to create like the biggest mental health care brand in the world, but also like fundamentally transform humanity by helping people access these medicines and get the most out of them. And so, everyone at Mindbloom is absolutely mission obsessed with helping people heal and helping people grow and create a better world. I'm pretty excited that I do think that these medicines have that capability and we can help people access them. We didn't invent these medicines, right? But we can at least help people access them and get them in a way that, can help them get the most out of them.
One of the things I ask a lot of founders when they come on is around the hiring process. And I used to say like, what are the qualities you look for? And I think it's pretty stale. Most people respond similar ways, right? You want self-starters, et cetera. And there's a few differences. But I think what's really, really fascinating that I've just started doing is asking like, what's your process for sussing out the BS versus like the actual authentic traits and qualities in the superstars that you can hire? So what does that look like for you?
So I think you nailed it. The disparity between people who are great and pretty good is like 50x bigger than most people think. And it's still really hard in an interview process to understand the difference. One of the things that I've learned over time is, I think there's two big things. One is to get super specific up front about exactly what this person is going to be doing. And I think a lot of people are like, oh, I need a marketing person, right? Or I need a salesperson, versus like really at least spending the time up front to do the exploration either yourself or by talking to other experts to like lay out exactly what this person needs to do in the first like 12 to 24 months. From there in the interview process, it's like getting way deeper than people think they need to on it. So if you ask someone like, what's your proudest accomplishment from your last job? And they're like, oh, I built this really incredible ebook. It was transformational for the company. We like got a bunch of customers from it. Like, you know, I got a promotion because of it. Most people would stop there and be like, oh, okay, cool. This person can do an ebook. And instead it's being like, awesome. Tell me from A to Z in excruciating detail, as much as you can, the entire story of the ebook, and then digging in at every process of the story. Like, why did you do that? What were the key metrics? How do people react? Tell me more about it. And what you can quickly see is that people who like really tackled it are really excited to go like really deep in depth. And others they get caught, like their pants down. I also ask people up front, I tell them, like a lot of people are really humble. And so please be as detailed as possible about exactly what you did versus what you as a team did. Because a lot of people will say most people will say I when they mean we as a team. And so by asking people to get really specific, you can really start to see like, did they do stuff or were they part of a giant organization or team that was, executing on something?
People, I've heard this from several founders, like you should hire for the job you want. You should, and Dennehy, I think, said this on my podcast, you should hire specifically people who have done exactly what you want them to do before versus someone who has the skill set and is aspiring. My question there is like, for someone like me, like I eventually want to be in a growth related role, but I've never worked in growth for a startup. I just haven't. You need to tackle your first opportunity first, right? So for those people out there that are listening, that are aspiring to do X, Y, and Z, what do you tell them when there's no way that they could have that process mapped if they've never done it before?
Yeah, I think the philosophy is right, but it's almost like oversimplistic because like I might have a job scorecard, like head of growth marketing, and I have like 6 outcomes and I've got like 10 competencies of like what they need to like be good at that match to like our culture, but also like what someone who's good at this job is going to need to be. And they might not be an A until they've proven in all of them, but they need to be in like some of them, and especially the most important ones. And so over time, like, people are coming in and they're then taking on other projects and they're like building that skill set. I think that's like safer than the alternative, which is like, I need a marketer. So you go hire a marketer, but it turns out this marketer doesn't do anything that you actually need in marketing. And you actually didn't even spend the time up front figuring out what you need in marketing, which means that you won't even be able to like manage this person because you don't even know what they should be doing. I think there's like another way to grow. I think this is like a Keith Rabois Founders Fund thing, which is like a growth by like cell division. So like rather than hiring someone who does something totally different than you, go learn how to do that thing and then hire someone to do the thing that you already know how to do so that you understand whether or not they're good at it and can like actually manage them versus just be like frustrated and confused and they're not getting you results because you don't even know what results look like. In terms of breaking in, I give this advice to a lot of people. I see a lot of people be like, oh, I'm going to go back to school and get like a marketing certificate to do marketing. I'm going to go like try to earn permission. And it's like delicate, but I think those are like negative signals. There's like the adage that like add $1 million to the valuation for every engineer and subtract 500,000 for every MBA. and I don't think that's like that wrong. Like startups have this interesting skill set that involves figuring things out, hustling, going fast, and like not asking for permission, and definitely not waiting to be told what to do, which is sort of goes to my "I'll never send my kids to school" thing, because that's what school teaches you, all these bad habits, traditional school. And so for people trying to get into it, I feel like there's never ever been a better time to learn how to do something and to just like get something out the door or shipped. Like whether it's like a part-time project, an internship, just something to demonstrate that you can like take a project end to end and you can autodidact and self-start. And so that's like the advice I give people, like go take an internship. Like I would, if you came to me and you're like, I've never done marketing, but I just read the top 5 or 10 books in marketing. I took this online course and I can do X, Y, and I can do X for you. And I'll do it for, for minimum wage over the next month. And they've like scoped it out. I would just be like, yeah, sure, go for it. And then now all of a sudden they've got a referral from like a seasoned CEO. They have a project and a deliverable that they can like show that they accomplished. And they didn't have to like wait around and ask for permission, hoping that somebody is going to like give them a shot.
School is not the answer in almost every scenario in those cases. It's funny because, I'm in the Deloitte ecosystem and like my DNA is telling me like no MBA, no MBA. And yet all the stimulus that I'm being exposed to is like, go get the MBA, go get the MBA. That's the process. And it's hard for people sometimes.
I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with an MBA. Like it's the same thing with startup, right? Same with the jobs we just talked about. It's about like working backwards and having like a really crystal clear vision of what this is, and then figuring out like what the best mechanism is to accomplish it. I think Ray Dalio has like a great framework, right? Which is like set super clear big goals, diagnose the problems stopping you from getting to those goals, get to the root cause of what those problems are, design a plan around them, and then execute, whether that's you or bringing people in. And so like if you're a consultant and you want to continue being a consultant and make partner and you need to take this big leap that requires the MBA, then that's like a path dependency and that's a strategic reason to do it. What's not a strategic reason is like, I want to work in startups, so I'll go get an MBA because you can spend those 2 years actually working in startups. Or I don't know what I want to do, so I'll go get an MBA. It'll open up doors it probably opens up student debt, which closes doors.
Imagine you're talking to someone who's like 18. So I think these MBA examples are people who have, tried things, had undergrad experience, et cetera. But someone who's 18, it's kind of in 2020 or 2021, like, what are you telling that person? Maybe they're going to college, maybe they're not. They're smart, they're ambitious, but they're kind of lost in terms of like what to focus their time on. What would you tell those people?
So I talk to people like this all the time. I get introduced to a lot of siblings and a lot of people who are interested in startups. I tell them all the same thing, and I think it's really hard to get through. I think it's something that people have to like see for themselves. Unfortunately, I tell them that you essentially have spent the last 18 years being completely conditioned in a way that's going to make you not successful. You've been told and taught to shut up and do what you're told. And if you follow that track, you'll be successful. But that is like not how the world works. And that's scary for most people. But it's actually really exhilarating because you actually have like the power to go and learn whatever it is you want from the foremost experts. You pick up the top 5 books in marketing. You read those, you will know way more than someone who just got an MBA in marketing. Way more. And you have the power to learn how to code, like learn how to write, and like actually like create something on your own. I just think it's really challenging for people to learn that they can take control and they can like choose for themselves, and they can get like permissionless ability to like create and build. It took me a long time. I went through like a pretty depression is a strong word, but like I had like a career misstep and a false start right out of college, and I was like, I'm sitting here. I was valedictorian in my high school. I went to Wharton. I did everything I'm supposed to, and I literally don't have opportunities and don't know what I'm supposed to do with myself, and feel super unfulfilled and like directionless. Like this wasn't supposed to happen to me. Wasn't I just supposed to like do what I'm told and then I'm going to crush it? And for me, it was my now wife gave me a copy of 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss, and it started like catalyzing this like viewpoint of like, wait, what if I just did it myself? Like I'm gonna have to throw aside this idea that someone's gonna give me a promotion and give me a career and I've like earned it. I'm gonna have to like go build it on my own. And that plus learning about startups sort of set me on the path that it's just been insanely fulfilling. And I'm grateful every day for it.
What are a couple of trends or areas that you see that are really exciting that in the next 2 to 3 years, outside of your space, that are exciting to you?
I love this question because I've so many friends who like want to start companies. Like, Dylan, where do you get ideas? And it's like I get ideas because I'm weird and I'm a nerd, and so I'm like already like living slightly in the future. And most of the stuff I do is probably not going to be part of the future, but some of it is, right? Like, yeah, say psychedelic medicine, for instance. So your question for me is like, what are some of the trends I'm most excited about? Um, Co-living is obviously one that we just discussed earlier. That's something I'm really excited about. That's not a that's not a business idea though. I mean, it could be for some people, but that's not why I'm pursuing it. Um, I think that we have conquered famine. I think I mean, I know people are like freaked out about COVID and they should be, but like there's like much worse pestilence in human history. So we've like largely conquered disease and pestilence. We don't have, at least haven't for a while, and hopefully won't in the future, thanks to like the interconnectedness of global commerce. We don't have a lot of war, and so like, sort of like this last bastion for humanity is like achieving like happiness and fulfillment, and we are just so far from it, like light years, and we're getting further and further somehow. Um, and so I think there are just so many opportunities, and we're like day one of helping people become like happy, healthy, fulfilled. Um, and I think like right now people think like, oh man, there's so many like mental well-being or wellness companies, like so many health companies. But I think like we're just at like day one of it, because when you start having access to like more and more abundance, having like all of your basic needs taken care of, it's going to be like meaning, purpose, connection, like mental well-being, and intelligence or optimization or fulfillment. That is sort of like the last thing left. So like self-actualization and transcendence. It's obviously a big thing that we're doing in Mindbloom, both in terms of being a serious mental health care company, helping people have anxiety, depression, other mood disorders, as well as just helping those people become their best self. But I think that's like the trend of trends because I think we're like just getting there, but it's going to be a long-term trend. And I think a major component of that too is going to be like consciousness and awareness. I don't think like, I know maybe people think like, oh, meditation might be like a big phase and fad. But this is like ancient wisdom that I think was maybe just like lost or not quite ported over to the West. And I think similar to like psychedelics for me, like accessing meditation and going deep into it, it's become such a big part of my life. And it's just so clear that it's like just truth, like how valuable it is for me and how fulfilling it is. I think a lot more people are going to discover that. I don't know how many companies can be built around that because it's inherently pretty cheap to learn how to meditate and sit on your ass and do it. But I do think that's going to be a big trend. It's going to have like a domino effect into our culture.
What's one, I hate the word hack, but one trick or habit that you do consistently from either a productivity perspective or life perspective that you don't think a lot of people do that helps you get ahead or just do well in the day?
Mm. I'll give you one that my friend was asking me about this morning. My wife and I were staying in his apartment while before we get our new lease at our place here in Austin, and he goes, what is that? I'm like, oh, it's a pre-workout drink. He goes, no, what is that thing on your face shining light in your eyes? I totally forgot I was wearing it. So every morning, first thing I do when I pop up is I put on what's called a luminette. It's this device that goes like on your forehead and it shines like white and blue light into your eyes. The idea is that it like starts stimulating your cortisol cycle and to help you like wake up and become more alert more quickly. I try a lot of these biohacking stuff, and almost all of them, right, like don't pan out. I like there's like Juve red light I've tried a ton and don't feel any noticeable effects. There's like new calm parasympathetic nervous system products, and some people get really great benefits, and that's awesome. But for me, it's like hard to like feel benefits of a lot of these products. The Luminette is just like stunning. I can't believe it. Every single person I've given one to, they put it on in the morning and they feel like they're awake and they're alert and they continue using it. So I feel like it's underappreciated and represented in the optimization sphere for how effective it is.
who are one or two other founders, and I don't even really look at founders in like tiers, but like let's say one or two founders that you aspire to be like, or you consume their content a lot like religiously and you look up to?
Yeah, there are a few. Um, I love, I love what Elon Musk does from a movement creation perspective. Something to try to emulate at Mindbloom because I find it, I think inspiration is like one of the scarcest resources we have, which is crazy. There's a lot of victim mentality going around, and it's hard to find people and things that are inspiring, and that's sad. And I think what he does in terms of building companies and presenting them as something that is not just try to create an incredible product, but create something better for humanity is incredible. More tactically, I study what Patrick Collison at Stripe, what Jeff Bezos at Amazon, what Ray Dalio at Bridgewater do in terms of building an organization, as well as now Reed Hastings at Netflix. So part of like we have like a company library and give everybody a Kindle and reimburse any books that they buy for personal and professional development. And in our sort of like recommended reading list are No Rules Rules, the new Netflix book, which I can't recommend enough. Principles by Ray Dalio, a lot of the Amazon leadership principles, and that have made their way into our culture of consciousness. Where we think that there's a better new way to work, more evolved way to work that is like radically transparent, intellectually honest, like candid with positive intent, a lot of freedom and responsibility, all while cultivating wholeness where people can show up as like their true authentic selves. And I think a lot of people hear about these entrepreneurs and think what they do sounds crazy, but when you peel back the hood and really look at like the principles of it and how it operates, it feels a lot more human, a lot more evolved.
I'm assuming because you're on this that you do consume podcasts in some sense, right? Do you like podcasts?
I told you I'm a big nerd. I read a lot of books, so I'm mostly listening to audiobooks, but I will catch the occasional podcast.
Yeah, because my question was, and I'm going to start doing this with everyone I have on, like of the podcasts that you listened to that you found resonated with you most, or you kept going back and checking for new episodes, like what was it about those shows that kept pulling you back in?
Yeah, I would say 90% of the podcast episodes I've listened to were the Tim Ferriss show right when he came out with it. So I probably listened to like 80% of his first, I don't know, 100 episodes. From there, I got back into audiobooks. And now I'll listen to podcasts like people send me, some startup podcasts like this or like Masters of Scale, others more, I don't know, call like intellectually like stimulating or interesting, almost like a nonfiction book podcast. So I would say that the primarily podcasts I'm listening to are really trying to help me like self-actualize, like become a better self and learn about like different approaches for how people are like living a little bit on the fringe, and things that I think sound weird. Like for me, I want to, when I'm listening to somebody or learning about something or talking to somebody, I want to have a knee-jerk reaction where I don't like it, where I have like an aversion that says like, that's weird, that's gross, that's funky. I totally disagree with you. Like the last thing I want to do is be stuck in an echo chamber. Like I want to hear radically different, but like intelligently thought through viewpoints that make me almost like uncomfortable. I feel like being in that sort of stretch zone is like where I experience growth.
If you had to write a startup manifesto with 5 of the most important key lessons or pitfalls to avoid when starting out, what would they be?
So number one, first and foremost, is to get the strategy right and to continue making sure the strategy is right. There's nothing worse than realizing you're like marching through the jungle, leading a ton of people with a machete, and you're just like about to walk them off a cliff. So I think about, I mentioned Brian Balfour earlier, actually. He has this incredible framework that we use at Mindbloom, which is a product, market, channels, model fit. So you don't just need to be in a good market and understand your market and a product that fulfills key core needs in that market. You also need distribution channels that make sense for that product in that market, and you need a business model that can support marketing or acquiring customers in that channel, and that market will pay for. So yeah, getting the strategy right, and even at Mighty, we we're a P2P lending marketplace after our Series A, back when that was like really hot, after like Lending Club had IPO'd and On Deck had a big IPO previously. And after like a year, we're seeing like all of these market dynamics that we thought were going to work, we're not working. And our board encouraged us like to continue pushing. Like, it's just really hard. You got to like break through. And ultimately we made this really hard decision to hard pivot the business to B2B, to like rebuild everything we were building for a marketplace to sell as a SaaS platform. We had all these customers that we were disrupting. We had all these people in the industry we were going to disrupt, and now we're selling software to them. And it was one of the most painful. It was the most painful thing I've ever done in my career, other than having a soul crushing job right out of college at a talent agency. And ultimately saved the business. And by focusing on making sure that our strategy was right and not just like blindly marching forward, we like saved that business. The second thing is to feed strengths and opportunities and starve problems and weaknesses. Have you ever played Stars of Catan?
Definitely. Love it.
So I am very good at Stars of Catan. Just played on Thanksgiving and just crushed my entire family. And I think the reason I'm good at Stars of Catan, based on my win-loss record, which is exceptional, is that I just find like one or two call it like all-in strategies, and I invest everything into them. So and that gives me like an outsized, that gives me like more leverage than everybody else who maybe has like a diluted strategy. So I see a lot of people and companies who try to do like too many things, or and I've done this myself, or they really focus on like all this little minutia versus like setting all of that aside, finding a few things that are like your competitive advantage that you want to be like exceptional at, and just like pushing all in on that, and trying to find like the biggest lever and just pulling that lever at the exclusion of every other lever. The third, which I think we mentioned earlier, is just how big the gap is between great talent and good talent. And I think relentlessly figuring out how to work with exceptional talent is one of those levers. And so that might mean you need to like pay up for that talent and not be cheap. It might mean you need to like relentlessly cull talent if it's just not at that standard. And that also means like understanding like who you need and what people's strengths are, and putting them in a position to succeed at the right point in their career. Like, sometimes great talent is great in one area, but if you move them somewhere else, or they're not in the right position, then they're just not great in that area, or they're not great in that culture. But really getting to a point where you look around the table and every single person gives you energy. And, if you ask yourself, say like, would I be disappointed if this person came to me tomorrow and let me know that they got another job? If you wouldn't be disappointed, then like that person's not a fit for the company and needs to go. Next would be similar to that would be, when finding talent, to not go out and like find the person you think you need, but to take like responsibility, especially as like a founder, know that you probably have the ability to like do a lot of jobs and figure a lot out, to get super specific about like exactly what you want people to accomplish, and then go out and find people who can like crush those things, and to get 10 times more like specific and granular about what those things are, and dive into people's backgrounds and strengths and skills and stories 10 times deeper than I think. The deeper I dive into both those outcomes and people's backgrounds, I just keep realizing I can go deeper and deeper. The last and maybe the most important is just like the importance of relentless focus. I think the most common heuristic I'm using at Mindbloom is asking us as a company, but every individual at the company, like, what is the number one thing that you could be working on that would move the needle long-term for the company? Not tomorrow, but like long-term, that we want to add like things. We want to like add, things like add zeros to the business long-term. And just being relentless about that. So everyone thinks they're focused, but it's just never ceases to amaze me how many things can actually be cut at the exclusion of like one or two most important things, and just how much additional velocity that actually generates. Fighting entropy is hard.
That's such a good point. I mean, so many people, they say they're focused, but they're unwilling to cut it down to that 1 to 2. I mean, I find even with myself, I would love to be able to double down on two things, and I just like can't get myself to do it. It's so difficult, but so key.
I'm a parallel processor. Like I can multitask effectively. I consider my strength that I can do a million things at once. So it's like counterintuitive to me to do relentless focus. But as I've forced myself to, I've just seen how much more velocity I can get when I go project by project or thing by thing versus taking on a ton.
Yeah.
So yeah, those would be my 5.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for that list. And before I let you go, I just want to acknowledge you for a second. I think, I'm obviously hosting, but I'm a huge fan and participant. And as listening to the conversation, you're giving off a lot of strong energy and you're super authentic, which I love.
Thanks, dude.
When I'm thinking through like over the course of the hour talking, I always try to pull out like what are the things that are going to inspire me moving forward. And that like real authenticity you talked about, trying to level up your awareness, like you can almost feel that in the conversation. At least I can. Hopefully the listeners can as well. So I just really want to thank you again for coming on. I'm going to be a huge fan of you and Mindbloom, and I hope we get to meet up in person sometime. And thanks again.
You too, Kyle. This was a blast, man.
Dylan Beynon, founder of Mindbloom. Thank you so much for coming on the show.